Tony Blair, the longest-serving Labour Prime Minister, oversaw the Northern Irish peace process, public sector reform and the response to the 9/11 and 7/7 terrorist attacks. Tony Blair was born in 1953 in Edinburgh, Scotland. After taking a gap year he attended the University of Oxford and studied law. After graduating he became a barrister. He joined the Labour Party in 1975 and, in 1983, successfully fought for the safe seat of Sedgefield. Gordon Brown was also elected in 1983 and they became firm allies. Tony Blair assumed several shadow cabinet roles before being made Shadow Home Secretary in 1992. In 1994, his and Gordon Brown's friendship was permanently changed when the Labour leader, John Smith, died suddenly. Tony Blair won the following leadership contest overwhelmingly, having made an agreement with Gordon Brown that, if he didn't stand, he would become a powerful chancellor should Labour win the next election. Tony Blair was seen as a new kind of politician with enormous charisma, arguably the finest opposition leader of modern times, even succeeding in reforming Clause 4 of the Labour Constitution. It was of little surprise when Labour won the 1997 general election by a landslide majority of 179. Succeeding John Major to the role, he officially became Prime Minister on May 2, 1997. Important constitutional changes happened quickly, with Scottish and Welsh devolution, reform to the House of Lords, the Human Rights Act and a Freedom of Information Act. One of his biggest achievements came in 1998 when the Northern Irish peace process really made progress with the Good Friday Agreement. On foreign affairs, he became increasingly convinced of Britain's need to become more involved, joining the American bombing of Iraq in 1998. A landmark came in 1999 when he risked much to protect the Kosovars, his idea of liberal interventionism explained in his Chicago speech on the doctrine of the international community. Limited military involvement in Sierra Leone in 2000 reinforced the democratically elected government. Thanks to Tony Blair's leadership, a healthy economy and a poor showing by the Conservative Party, Labour won the 2001 general election with another landslide, with 167 seats. His priority for the second term was to increase the pace of public sector reform, which took shape in the Prime Minister's delivery unit, bills on foundation hospitals, academy schools, and university tuition fees, and the increasing choice agenda. He also intended to call a referendum over Britain adopting the euro, but events prevented this. The 9/11 terrorist attacks became defining moments for Tony Blair and his legacy. He allied with the USA and President Bush over the need to confront militant Islamism, first in Afghanistan in 2001 and then, much more controversially, in 2003 with the invasion of Iraq. The case for war in the UK had been built around the widespread belief that Saddam harbored weapons of mass destruction, WMD, which were not subsequently found. This, together with criticism over use of the machinery of government and doubts over the legality of the UK's involvement, led the previously popular Tony Blair to become a divisive figure. Despite this, he led Labour to a third general election victory in 2005, with a much smaller but still significant majority of 66. The 7/7 London explosions by British-born Muslim suicide bombers led Blair to try to tighten civil liberties, another cause of public division. In 2006, the Israel-Lebanon war saw a very large Labour rebellion against Tony Blair over his reluctance to criticize Israel and his continued support for Bush. He resigned as Prime Minister on June 27, 2007. Tony Blair, born May 6, 1953, Edinburgh, Scotland, is a British Labour Party leader who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, 1997 to 2007. He was the youngest Prime Minister since 1812 and the longest-serving Labour Prime Minister, and his 10-year tenure as Prime Minister was the second longest continuous period, after Margaret Thatcher's, in more than 150 years. The son of a barrister, Blair attended Fettes College in Edinburgh, a school often viewed as Scotland's Eton, and St John's College of the University of Oxford, where he combined the study of law with interest in religious ideas and popular music. But he displayed little enthusiasm for politics until he met his future wife, Cherie Booth. He graduated from Oxford in 1975 and was called to the bar the following year. While specializing in employment and commercial law, he became increasingly involved in Labour Party politics and in 1983 was elected to the House of Commons to the safe Labour parliamentary seat of Sedgefield, a tight-knit former mining district in northeastern England. His entry into politics coincided with the long political ascendancy of the Conservative Party, from 1979, and Labour's loss of 4 consecutive general elections, from 1979 through 1992. Entering Labour's shadow cabinet in 1988, Blair became the most outspoken of those party leaders calling for Labour to move to the political centre and de-emphasise its traditional advocacy of state control and public ownership of certain sectors of the economy. In 1992 John Smith was elected Labour leader, and he appointed Blair shadow Home Secretary. When Smith died suddenly in May 1994, Blair seized the opportunity, and in July he was elected party leader with 57% support. His election came as something of a surprise because many believed the post would go to Gordon Brown, the shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, who had partnered with Blair in an attempt to move Labour to the political centre. However, Blair's stock within the party had risen, and Brown had reluctantly agreed to step aside, though not before the two had come to an understanding that Blair would back Brown as his eventual successor. By mid-1995 Blair had revamped the Labour Party's platform. He abandoned the party's stated commitment to the nationalisation of the economy, by waging a successful battle to have the party modify its constitution's Clause 4, which committed the party to the common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, reduced links with trade unions, and obtained unprecedented commitments to free enterprise, anti-inflationary policies, aggressive crime prevention, and support for Britain's integration into the European Union, EU. Blair summed up his reforms often opposed by members of his own party by describing the party as New Labour. Under his leadership, the Labour Party heavily defeated the Conservatives in nationwide municipal elections held in May 1995 and won a landslide victory over the Conservatives in the general election of May 1997, having waged a campaign that centred on the promise that things can only get better. Prime Ministership. First term. Blair enjoyed a 179-seat majority in the House of Commons, the biggest parliamentary majority in the history of the Labour Party and the largest majority of any party since 1935. Inspired by sociologist Anthony Giddens, he described his philosophy of government as the third way. Blair claimed that his policies were designed to enable social democracy to respond to the challenges of the worldwide market economy and to equip citizens to cope with what Giddens called the major revolutions of our time, including globalization. Perhaps the most coherent view about Blair's search for the third way was that it was an endeavor to discover a form of progressive politics distinguishing itself from the conservatism of both left and right. Blair frequently looked for advice from businessmen who had come to prominence earlier, under the Conservative Prime Minister Thatcher. Private firms were given an important role in financing state infrastructure projects, despite widespread criticism that this financing was on terms often disadvantageous to the taxpayer. Blair gave control of the economic agenda to Gordon Brown, his Chancellor of the Exchequer and eventual successor. The Blair government's first major initiative and perhaps its boldest granted the Bank of England the power to determine interest rates without government consultation, a policy that had not appeared in the party's platform. The government also immediately signed the Maastricht Treaty's social chapter and turned its attention to brokering a peace agreement between Republicans and Unionists in Northern Ireland. Blair initiated reforms in the House of Commons, modernising the format of Prime Minister's Question Time, during which the Prime Minister answers questions from members of Parliament. During his first year in office, he organised referenda that created devolved assemblies in Scotland and Wales and developed a joint committee to coordinate constitutional and other policies with the opposition Liberal Democrats. Blair also gave important powers to unelected advisers, notably media consultant Alastair Campbell. The marketing image they adopted, known as Cool Britannia, suggested that Britain was a dynamic and successful country that had reinvented itself after years of decline and internal division. New Labour eagerly sought the approval of the mass circulation press, particularly conservative tabloids such as The Sun, by embracing celebrity culture as well as respect for traditions, including the monarchy. In May 1998, Blair led a successful referendum campaign to create a new assembly for London and to establish the city's first directly elected mayor. That year Blair also helped to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Agreement, which was ratified overwhelmingly in both Ireland and Northern Ireland and which created an elected devolved power-sharing assembly in Northern Ireland for the first time since 1972. Blair also eliminated all but 92 of the hereditary members of the House of Lords as the prelude to more extensive reforms of that chamber. The population began to grow skeptical of Blair as a new election approached, as it became clear that his government remained highly centralized and that he had no plans for overdue reforms in the public services. Opinion polls found that there was public concern regarding financial misbehavior in government, manipulation of the media, the granting of honors to individuals who contributed to Labour Party funds, nepotism, and other actions that put the interests of business before ordinary citizens. Second term of Tony Blair. Facing a deeply unpopular opposition, however, Blair was easily re-elected in May 2001 to a 167-seat majority in the House of Commons, the largest ever second-term majority in British electoral history, though voter turnout was the lowest since 1918. His second term was dominated by international affairs. In the late 1990s he had won praise by mounting peacekeeping operations in the Serbian province of Kosovo and in Sierra Leone. The operations were part of what his Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, called the new ethical dimension to the country's foreign policy. After the September 11 attacks on the United States in 2001, Britain played a key role in forming an international coalition that succeeded in driving the Taliban from power in Afghanistan, which had been allowed to become a safe haven for Islamic militants such as Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of the attacks. Blair enjoyed a good relationship with U.S. press. George W. Bush and allied the United Kingdom with the United States in a global war against terrorism. In early 2003, following passage by the United Nations Security Council of a resolution mandating the return of weapons inspectors to Iraq, Blair and Bush tried without success to persuade other Security Council members that continued weapons inspections would not succeed in uncovering any weapons of mass destruction held by the Iraqi government of Saddam Hussein. Despite deep divisions within the Labour Party, several ministers resigned and 139 Labour members of Parliament voted in favour of a motion opposing the government's policy and strong public opposition to a war with Iraq. Blair, with Bush, led a coalition of military forces in an attack on Iraq in March 2003. Blair's enthusiastic support for the action damaged his reputation as a global statesman, and he fell out with key European allies. When military inspectors failed to uncover weapons of mass destruction, the Blair government was accused of distorting, sexing up, intelligence on which it had based its claim that Iraq was an imminent threat. In October 2004, Blair announced that he would seek a third term as Prime Minister but would not stand for a fourth term. Despite lingering public dissatisfaction with Blair's policy in Iraq, Blair led the Labour Party to its third successive general election victory in May 2005, albeit with a sharply reduced majority. Simmering revolt in the Labour Party over both Iraq and Blair's rejection of core Labour policies led him to promise that he would resign before the next election. Blair's popularity, with both the general public and the Labour members of Parliament, generally declined after the election. Many people in Britain felt that the country was in the grip of a serious malaise. Social cohesion seemed to be collapsing in much of urban Britain, as shown by a steep rise in violent crime and open drug dealing. Public officials in the police, civil service, and education sectors seemed to be unable to grapple effectively with the social crisis as they struggled to meet bureaucratic targets. After Islamic extremists exploded bombs in London on July 7, 2005, killing 54 people, Blair began to emphasize the need for a common public culture, and former multicultural policies that encouraged ethnic groups to separate into different communities were repudiated. Blair's government suffered its first defeat in the House of Commons in November 2005, when 49 Labour members of Parliament joined the opposition in voting against anti-terrorist laws that would have extended the length of time suspects could be held without charge. Subsequently, many Labour members of Parliament called for Blair to announce a date for his departure as Prime Minister well before the next general election. Following a series of resignations by junior ministers, Blair declared in September 2006 that he would stand down as Prime Minister within a year. On May 10, 2007, 1 week after Labour was defeated by the Scottish National Party in elections to the Scottish Parliament and suffered major defeats in English local elections as well, and 2 days after devolved power was returned from London to a power-sharing government in Northern Ireland, Blair announced that he would officially tender his resignation as Prime Minister on June 27, 2007. Blair subsequently was succeeded as leader of the Labour Party and as Prime Minister by his long-serving Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown. Blair's decade in office was marked by uninterrupted economic growth and a more independent Bank of England. Blair also preserved much of Thatcher's market radicalism while managing to place greater emphasis on social justice. Numerous minority groups found his government more sympathetic to their concerns, notably gays, who by 2004 were allowed to enter into civil partnerships recognized by the law. Many believed, however, that Blair's role in restoring peace to Northern Ireland would come to be seen as his most enduring political legacy. Blair showed a remarkable ability to convey optimism and energy in the face of adversity caused not least by the failure in Iraq. Critics of his record argued that, instead of using his parliamentary majority to reform the institutions of state, he pursued incoherent short-term policies that left Britain ill-governed in important areas. The state became more intrusive and even more authoritarian without managing to overcome a range of social ills, particularly rising crime and drug use. The economy grew steadily, but it was burdened by low productivity and growing volumes of personal and state debt. Citizens were heavily taxed, and Britain lost much of its remaining manufacturing base, becoming more dependent on financial services and low-skilled sectors for progress. Blair allowed millions of mainly low-skilled migrant workers to settle in the country, and he was criticized for leaving the economy more exposed to the forces of globalization than that of any other large Western country. The biggest cloud hanging over his reputation was the failure to ensure that British involvement in the invasion and occupation of Iraq resulted in policies capable of preventing that country from becoming a source of instability in the Middle East. History could judge his premiership more kindly in the future. However, at the time that he stepped down, Blair was widely viewed as a lucky politician with exceptional talents that enabled him to be a successful vote winner, but ultimately lacking the ability to be a noteworthy reformer at home or a stabilizing force in a world facing the resurgence of dangerous divisions. Life after the premiership of Tony Blair. Nonetheless, after 10 years in office but still only in his early 50s, Blair was not ready to retire from the world scene. On the day of his resignation in 2007, he announced that he would resign his seat in the House of Commons, and he was selected by the Quartet, the United States, the EU, Russia, and the United Nations to serve as Special Envoy to the Middle East. He held the post until 2015. Blair made headlines in December 2007 when he converted to Roman Catholicism. Britain has never had a Roman Catholic Prime Minister. Before his conversion, he had publicly maintained silence on matters of personal faith, but by 2008 he had demonstrated a deep commitment to initiatives aimed at fostering interfaith cooperation globally. In 2010 Blair published his memoir, A Journey, in which he reasserted his support for the Iraq War and described his strained relationship with Gordon Brown. In July 2016, Blair's actions in the lead-up to the Iraq War and his stewardship of Britain's involvement in the conflict came under withering criticism with the release of the Shilkut Report, the findings of a 7-year inquiry into Britain's role in the war, including the decision to go to war, whether troops had been adequately prepared, and planning for the war's aftermath. The inquiry was launched in 2009 by Prime Minister Brown and led by Sir John Shilkut, a career civil servant. Evidence was provided by about 150 witnesses including Blair, who testified twice, and some 150,000 documents, among which were communications between Blair and Bush. While the 2.6 million word report did not provide any judgments on Blair's legal culpability for the conduct of the war, it concluded that he had guided Britain into a military invasion of Iraq before all peaceful options for Iraqi disarmament had been exhausted. In presenting the report, Shilkut said that the judgments about the severity of the threat posed by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction had been presented with a certainty that was not justified. Moreover, the inquiry found that despite explicit warnings, the Blair government had underestimated the consequences of the invasion and that its planning and preparations for post-war Iraq were wholly inadequate. The report also presented a picture of Blair's overestimating his ability to influence Bush and of Blair's willingness to take Britain to war beside the United States despite his failure to alert Bush to the difficulties posed by the war and his inability to persuade the U.S. President of the necessity of full UN Security Council approval of the invasion. Responding to the report shortly after its release, Blair claimed that it made clear that he had not made any secret commitment to war with Bush and that it should lay to rest allegations of bad faith, lies or deceit. Whether people agree or disagree with my decision to take military action against Saddam Hussein, he added, I took it in good faith and in what I believe to be the best interests of the country. Return to politics. In March 2017, Blair announced his intention to again become involved in the world of politics with the founding of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which he said was intended to function as a new policy platform to refill the wide open space in the middle of politics. Blair insisted that he intended neither to form a new political party nor to personally return to frontline politics, but he was critical of both authoritarian populism and the leftward direction in which the Labour Party had been taken by Jeremy Corbyn, who had replaced Brown's successor, Ed Miliband, as leader. In September, the new institute published a policy paper outlining steps that the British government could undertake to impose new restrictions on immigration that would not require Britain's withdrawal from the EU, Brexit. In February 2016, in an attempt to placate the vocal faction of Eurosceptics within his own party as well those voters who had turned to the anti-immigration United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP, Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron negotiated with the European Council on reforms to British membership in the EU. Having won what he deemed to be sufficient concessions from the Council, Cameron then scheduled a national referendum for June 23, 2016, on whether Britain should withdraw from the EU. British voters shocked the world by voting in favour of exiting the EU. Cameron resigned, and the government of new Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May began negotiations with the EU, mandated to be completed by the end of March 2019, on the terms of Britain's departure. As Parliament debated the details of the European Union withdrawal bill in September 2017, Blair raised the possibility of pulling the plug on Brexit. Thank you for watching this video.